The movie follows the adventures of Largo Winch, a character taken directly from a comic. And yes, he has his own film series, because one was not enough. His life took a complete turn when he inherited control of the W Group, a huge billionaire conglomerate, after the mysterious murder of his adoptive father. And what did Largo Winch do after solving that crime? Well, instead of relaxing in a Wolf of Wall Street style, he renounced his millionaire life and created a humanitarian foundation. Years after those events, it seems Largo has found peace in the Burmese jungle alongside his teenage son, Num. While he no longer enjoys his former luxuries, the protagonist prefers this rustic environment for his son's upbringing, as it reminds him of his own childhood. Moreover, it was the home of his late wife. Despite his efforts, he can't manage to connect with Num and his ideals, which are very different from his own. Their argument is watched from afar by a man named Ejo Burntwood, who seems to have a special interest in Largo. As soon as Ejo sees Num leave, upset, he gives an order to his henchmen. A while later, Largo hears his son cry out in despair. When he rushes over, he sees hooded men kidnapping Num. As soon as the criminals drive off, Largo sprints through the mountains, trying to cut them off. Pulling a wheelie, he shields himself from the kidnappers' gunfire. Then Largo leaps onto the truck and fights the criminals hand-to-hand, showing off his impeccable combat skills. Unfortunately, this causes the vehicle to lose control and fall into a river. Largo barely emerges from the water, only to discover that his son did not make it out. While he desperately searches for Num, Ejo watches him from the jungle. Suddenly, a leftover mercenary points a gun at Ejo, demanding his payment. However, Ejo is unfazed by bullets and knocks the man out with a single blow to the neck. 3 weeks of fruitless searching in the jungle pass, and Largo still has no clues about his son. As a result, he's forced to return to Thailand and resume his life as a businessman, the very life he had sworn to leave behind. With help from his colleague Chloe, a tech prodigy, Largo interacts with an AI simulation of his son. The simulation is based on Num's social media posts, where he expressed hatred towards his father's conglomerates for the damage they do to the world. Driven by guilt and his son's environmentalist message, Largo decides that his empire will now be eco-friendly. Suddenly, the simulation suffers a cyber attack, making way for a video of Denny, a former Largo employee, who blames him for the downfall of Winch Power, the company he worked for. At the end of the message, Denny takes his own life. The protagonist has no time to learn how this happened when he receives an unexpected call from his kidnapped son, whose captor, Ejo, also greets him. After hanging up, Ejo stands over Denny's body like a James Bond villain, satisfied with his own cruelty. In the wake of the late Denny's accusations, people become enraged with the W Group, believing they committed an unprecedented financial fraud. Confronted with this crisis, Largo deduces that someone has been siphoning Winch Power's accounts. It so happens that Steve, the director who took over after the company merged with the W Group, has vanished. And to top it all off, Largo must now deal with a $50 billion loss. Yes, $50 billion, that could jeopardize his company. Whoever carried this out is also responsible for Num's kidnapping, and Largo isn't about to let them get away with it. As a first step, he decides to check out the late Denny's home in Canada, where, through Denny's laptop, he learns that Denny had terminal cancer. Helena, Denny's widow, catches Largo by surprise with a shotgun. She makes it clear that her husband's illness wasn't the reason he took his life. In fact, Denny wanted to show the world how terrible Largo is, or at least that's what he was led to believe. When Largo reveals that his son has been kidnapped, Helena realizes he's another victim and lowers her weapon. Largo then asks for her help in locating Steve, Winch Power's owner. According to Helena, her husband always trusted Steve, despite Steve's reports being rather opaque. Therefore, Helena spied on Steve herself and discovered that Winch Power was purchasing tons of copper from a Chinese company that supposedly did not sell raw materials that way. Steve had been laundering money until he emptied Winch Power's coffers. Just as Helena is about to tell Largo the name of the company, Ejo shows up to silence her. Largo tries to defend himself by firing the shotgun at Ejo, but it barely bothers him. Overpowered, Largo witnesses Helena's cruel murder, after which Ejo forces him to hear an audio of his son pleading for help. When the police arrive, the criminal escapes, leaving the protagonist as the only suspect at the crime scene. At police headquarters, Largo is put in a cell next to Bonnie, a young radical environmentalist who reminds him of his son. True to a typical teen, she starts a live stream of the situation. Annoyed, Largo snatches her phone and calls his conglomerate's board, hoping they'll bail him out. But given the controversy surrounding their CEO, the board decides to remove him from the company and appoint Cochran in his place. Back in the cell, Bonnie provokes the guard with insults. Enraged, he enters to assault her. Thanks to her distraction, Largo manages to escape from the police station with his new unexpected ally. However, protesters outside catch them red-handed, forcing them to steal a sled and slide down a snowy slope, actually an entire mountain. During the descent, Ijo appears out of nowhere, as he always does at the worst possible moment. Facing this threat, Largo jumps off the sled and tackles the criminal, demanding information about his son. No matter how hard he hits him, all he gets is laughter until Ijo takes him down with his taser. Ijo makes it clear that Largo now only has two options: prison or death. Aboard a private jet, Largo calls Chloe and asks her to look into the Chinese company. It's such a quick chat that she doesn't have time to fill him in on the latest issues at his company. Meanwhile, Bonnie sees that her channel is growing exponentially thanks to her adventure with Largo, which also helps clear his reputation. This annoys Cochran, who feels his position threatened, so he orders Chloe to shut down Bonnie's channel. However, she refuses to comply. Back with the protagonist, he decides to recharge in the Burmese jungle village, where he hopes to plan his next moves. Bonnie's curiosity leads her to discover the grave of Largo's wife, which doesn't go over well with Largo, especially since she's also wearing his son's clothes. In the middle of scolding her, he experiences an unfamiliar pain that Bonnie recognizes as a panic attack. Breaking down in tears, Largo admits he couldn't protect the people he loved most. Trying to cheer him up, Bonnie goes to the grave of his wife and promises they'll find his son. Changing scenes, Ijo infiltrates the W Group's headquarters until reaching Cochran's office, where he disdainfully tosses aside a painting of Nereo Winch, Largo's father and founder of the conglomerate. After ranting about interior decor, he forces Cochran to write a suicide note in which Cochran takes the blame for a murdered executive that Ijo just executed. With no other choice, Cochran finishes the note under the assassin's direction, blaming Largo for everything. Summoning his last bit of bravery, Cochran declares that Largo has him in his sights and will not stop until he catches him. Tired of hearing this, Ijo ends his life with a shot. Chloe reveals she has discovered that the mysterious Chinese company was created only 8 months ago by a man named Cao Shen. On their way to the suspect's mines, Largo's group learns about the murders at the W Group and suspects Ijo is involved. Largo recalls a scandal involving his father Nereo. One of Nereo's employees had contracted a strange condition that prevented him from feeling pain and was killing him on the inside. That employee's son, Ijo, inherited the same condition. Consumed by rage, Ijo took a gun and tried to finish the job, but ended up killing his own father. Since then, he has sworn revenge on the Winch family. Once inside the mines, the protagonist starts asking workers if they've seen his son, but they prefer to focus on their tasks for fear of punishment. Meanwhile, Chloe tries to break into the mine's security system, but is caught by, yep, you guessed it, Ijo, who laughs at having startled her. As a last-minute twist, we discover that Chloe has been in cahoots with him from the start. Still, Chloe suggests stealing Cao Shen's money and leaving, having already achieved their main goal of destroying the Winch Empire. However, Ijo has no intention of giving up his vengeance. Back with the protagonist, Chloe shows him security footage where his son appears, yet she can't help but admit it's all a trap. Largo shows up at Cao Shen's military base anyway. When he politely asks about his son and gets no answer, he resorts to force. Unfortunately, he soon discovers that the boy pointed out as Num isn't actually his son. Just then, Ijo returns, telling him that Num didn't drown in the river. Meanwhile, Cao Shen hunts down his money for the criminal, and Ijo comments to Largo that his son would still be alive if only Largo hadn't tried to play the superhero. In any case, Largo is overpowered yet again, and his enemy delights in telling him he has the evidence that will finally condemn him. Right before delivering the final shot, Ijo misses and Largo attacks him hand to hand. It also turns out to be a bad idea, as nothing affects Ijo, not even fire. He's so confident that he lets his guard down, allowing Largo to gain the upper hand and impale him on a grappling hook. At that moment, Chloe shows up, pointing a gun at Bonnie. Regardless, Largo triggers the grappling hook's ascent, so Ijo orders Chloe to shoot. She fires, only to plunge off the platform to her death. Bonnie, on the other hand, falls into a water tank, which might not be so bad except she can't swim. Immediately, Largo dives in to save her, but it looks like he's too late because she's not showing any signs of life. Not wanting to go through the same heartbreak again, he manages to revive her using Ijo's taser. Speaking of Ijo, he manages to escape the grappling hook. Rather than pursue him, Largo decides to return to Thailand with Bonnie, who goes from being an orphan to the adopted daughter of a billionaire. Yay, it's exactly the protagonist's own story. With his reputation restored, he discards the pocket knife that symbolized his darker side and promises to make the planet better in the name of his son. If only he knew that Num survived the accident. However, Num lost his memory. After spending some time in a remote village, he is found by the man claiming to be his father, Ijo. If we learned anything here, it's that you can try being the planet's savior, but there's always a villain out there raising your amnesiac child. That probably counts as adoption too, folks.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe to follow us for more movie recaps.